Hello, everybody. Just for a quick reminder, the NSN applications for an NSN cord are due tonight. I sent that out, but if you have any questions, you can ask at the end of the meeting or send emails to me and Israel. And yeah, but without further ado, we're gonna have Dr. Wonders talk to us today.
All right, let me share my screen. Share screen. Let's see. Okay. All right, you guys can see my screen, I assume.
Yes.
Okay, let me pull up my presentation and switch presenter mode. Okay, you guys can see?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. All right, well, thank you for the invitation to speak today. I'm going to talk a little bit about my journey in nutrition and science, and then kind of switch gears and talk a little bit at the end about what you guys can do to be strong students, strong applicants for grad school and careers and things like that. Some of you I know are getting ready to graduate, but the tips I will provide will serve you throughout the rest of your life. So even if you're about to graduate, that's totally fine. Okay, so the first part, my journey in nutrition. This is kind of the roadmap that my life followed after high school. So I went to Auburn and I thought that I was going to go to med school. That I wasn't, dead set on it, but I always thought that was going to be my path. But I was a freshman, took calculus my first semester, and got a D in calculus. And then I failed chemistry too. This was my professor, Dr. Webb. And I just was taking this health professions orientations class, and they said, your freshman year maths and sciences, freshman and sophomore year maths and sciences are really what medical schools look at. So I realized I was not going to be a strong candidate for med school. So another thing I realized is that I didn't know how to study effectively when I started college. I was like probably many of you that in high school you could just show up on test day and like glance over your notes and do perfectly fine. And I bet many of you were like me and learned that that doesn't work once you get to college. So what I did was changed my major to nutrition, and I drastically changed my studying habits, which I'm sure many of you also have realized that you cannot be successful in your classes if you're studying for exams, that you have to study every day after class. I would come home, make note cards, and I would learn like 5 at a time and then put them in the back and then learn the next 5 and then take those 10 and learn them all and put them to the side and learn the next 5 and then add them all together and learn. And I had my note cards with me on my spring break trip. I had, so it's just a lot of studying every day after class. And I was able to overcome my freshman year grades. So I was able to take chemistry at a community college, earn the C that I needed, transfer it back to Auburn, and still graduate with honors in 2007. And I went through a DPD program, which is one that, when you're finished with it, you get this verification statement that you can then go and do a dietetic internship. Um, I graduated in 2007, but I had no research experience at this point, and I was, I think, the only person in my cohort to not apply to a dietetic internship. I didn't try to match an internship, and that was because this guy that I had been dating, who was in the military, was getting out of the military at the same time that I was about to graduate college, and he was coming to school at Auburn. So I didn't want to leave right when he was coming, and we could finally be together. So I decided to stay and just get a master's degree. I had no other reasoning behind it. It's not like I knew I wanted to pursue a career in research. I had no research experience at this point. And luckily it worked out, and we are still married 13 years now. But I wouldn't advocate making life decisions based on things that may not be permanent, but luckily it worked out for me. So I decided to stay at Auburn. and pursue my master's degree. And I worked with Dr. Serene Gropper at Auburn, and that name might sound familiar to you because the textbook that you use for macro and micro is written by Dr. Gropper. And this is the textbook that every nutrition program across the country uses. So she was at Auburn at the time, and I did my master's degree with her, and my thesis research was on the freshman 15, which is that idea that when students go off to college, they gain 15 pounds in their freshman year. And so it was a large study with over around 250 participants, and we looked at weight gain and body composition and dietary habits over their freshman year. And in our cohort, we did not see 15 pounds, but we did see closer to like 4 or 5 pounds gained over the freshman year. So that was my first taste of research. But while I was pursuing my master's degree, I wanted to get an assistantship so I didn't have to pay for my graduate degree. And so Dr. Gropper didn't have an assistantship, but Dr. Matthews did. And so I worked in Dr. Matthews' lab. And so Dr. Gropper's work was more, in humans and very applicable. Dr. Matthews' work was really truly bench science, where we were working with mice and rats and cells, and looking at, the molecular effects of nutrition at the, molecular level. And luckily, this was able to give me a different taste of research I had never seen before. And it also allowed me to go to school for free and get paid. So what I was getting paid was less than $1,000 a month take home. But in Auburn at that time, I was able to live off of that. So I didn't incur any debt in graduate school. And that's something that you guys should pay attention to too, because a lot of graduate programs will pay you to go to school. So it's not common at the master's level, I will say, to be able to get an assistantship that covers your tuition and pays you a livable wage. At the PhD level, that is something that is usually expected, that the student does not pay tuition and that they are paid to do research or serve as a graduate teaching assistant. That's another thing I did in grad school. I GTA'd the food science labs. That helped me get tuition waivers when I didn't have one with Dr. Matthews. And so if you're considering our graduate programs, especially with the coordinated program, we do offer a lot of assistantships. So most students in the program get either a full or half tuition waiver. The stipend is not a livable wage, but the main, benefit is that you're not having to pay tuition. And these assistantships are for things like teaching or helping to teach a class, grading, that kind of thing. Research, we have students that organize the GSU 1010 classes, that are those intro classes that all the freshmen have to take at Georgia State, and they get tuition waiver and stipend for that, or working in the pantry or with student nutrition services. So there's lots of opportunity for assistantships. So I got my master's degree in nutrition. One piece of advice that Dr. Matthews gave me while I was in his lab was that you shouldn't get all your degrees from one university. But again, I was cultivating this relationship with this person who was at Auburn now. And so I didn't want to leave Auburn. So I stayed, but I decided to get out of nutrition so that I could have a different experience. So Dr. Matthews' advice to not get all your degrees from one university is because you want some diversity of experience. If you're just hearing the same thing in the same department, you might not be as well rounded of a researcher as you could be if you went from Auburn to Vanderbilt and then did, another degree at Michigan or something. You'll get different experiences. So I decided to get out of nutrition. I already had 2 nutrition degrees, and I went to a different college within Auburn, which was the College of Veterinary Medicine, which is where their biomedical sciences PhD is housed. It just happens to be in the College of Veterinary Medicine, but it's not a veterinary degree. So I moved over to that college, and I had an assistantship the whole time to work with Dr. Robert Judd at Auburn. and we studied the effects of pharmacologic levels of niacin, so vitamin B3, on obesity-induced inflammation. We used mice, we used adipocytes and cell culture. And so while I wasn't in nutrition any longer, you can see that it's still very nutritionally relevant material that we were studying. And so I, took 4 years to do my PhD and graduated in 2012. And then oftentimes the next step after completing your PhD is to do a postdoc experience. That was really the most fun time of my research career. So I did my postdoc at Pennington Biomedical Research Center, which is in Baton Rouge. It's affiliated with LSU, Louisiana State University, but it's a separate campus. There are no students there, and it's really one of, if not the most prestigious nutrition and obesity research centers in the world. The laboratories are just, really, really nice. And we had speakers that were at the top of their game coming every week, and the postdocs got to have lunch with these invited speakers. So just being at that facility was awesome. Whatever research we wanted to do, there were people there with expertise that could help us. We had core facilities to just any question we wanted to ask, we could answer there. But another reason that it was a great experience is because when you're a postdoc, you're not in grad school, so you're not having to worry about teaching and passing classes and writing your dissertation and all these other things. You're not yet a faculty member, so you don't have to worry about teaching and all of, writing grants and doing all this stuff. You truly get to focus on the research, which is when I really got an appreciation for how fun research is. So you just read papers and you come up with ideas and you do experiments, and it was a really fun and productive time of my career. So I was in Baton Rouge for 3 years and completed a postdoc there that was with Dr. Tom Geddes. And then during those 3 years, I had two kids, and we decided we were like super far away from any of our family. My husband's family's in Massachusetts, so they're always going to be far away because I'm not moving up there. But my parents were in Tennessee, and we were like, let's try to get a little closer. So oh, this is another picture of the lab. So just again to show you how fun the lab is, like we would turn on the disco ball on Fridays, and it was just full of people in there doing research. This was before like everybody had their own AirPods and listened to podcasts and all that, but we would have a radio. It's over there, and we listened to like the morning shows that were funny, and so it was a really fun experience getting to just focus on research. So anyway, we were trying to get a little bit closer towards family. So after my 3 years of postdoc, I decided to look for jobs as a faculty member, and I saw that Georgia State was hiring in the Department of Nutrition, and so I applied and interviewed and was offered the position. So I came here in 2015 as an assistant professor, and then a year or two ago, I was promoted to associate professor. So when you go into academia, everybody pretty much, if you're in the tenure track side, you start out as an assistant professor, and you do that for about 5 to 6 years. And that's where you have to prove yourself that you can teach, that you can serve the university and your department, and that you can get grants and you can do research and you can mentor, and you have to submit this big dossier with all the stuff you've done and apply for promotion after about 5 to 6 years. And I was successful, luckily. And just to give you a little inside scoop, this tenure track thing, if I hadn't been successful, like if I hadn't met all those criteria, then if I wasn't successful with getting promoted and tenured, they don't just let you hang around. They don't just say, oh, well, you're still a valuable member. If you don't get it, you're gone. So luckily, I made it. And so now I'm an associate professor. And there's like no defined set of time. It's usually you want to try to go up for full professor after about 7 years or so. But it's really when you think you're ready, when you've met all the criteria you need for the next step. So what do I do as an associate professor? I'm also the director of the undergraduate program. As you know, I've been doing that since fall of 2016. So that involves, providing advisement to students and, um, helping oversee the nutrition student network and doing assessment of the program, making sure we're meeting all of our goals, marketing the program, going to speak at events, trying to get people to come and major in nutrition. I also provide service to the department, college, and university. So that just means being on lots of different committees for different things. Many of you know that until like 2 weeks ago, I was the chair of the University Senate Committee on Student Discipline. So that's just one thing that, took up time. So if you're considering this path of going off into academia, it's not just that you get to teach, and teaching is like a very small part of my responsibilities. So this service to the department, college, and university takes up a lot of time. Teaching, of course, is another important part of my job that I really like. And sometimes you get to pick what classes you teach, and other times they just say, hey, we need somebody to teach this class. But usually, after you've been in a position for a while, you kind of set in what classes you teach and you get to refine them and update them and keep current with what's going on in the literature to make sure your courses are still relevant. So like for those of you who have taken my energy metabolism and obesity class, that was a new class that they had added to the curriculum right before I joined. No one had ever taught it. So I got to create it from scratch and I really enjoyed that. A major part of my job, though, is to do research, which is another part of my job that I really like. So my research program, I'll talk a little bit about it in the upcoming slides, but these are some pictures of some of the students that have come through my lab. This is a current picture now of the students that are in my lab, but so Hannah is now a PhD student and basically running the show in the lab. But this was a picture of her with Patricia and Catherine when they were all undergrad. So getting involved with research at the undergraduate level is something that you can do that I'll talk about a little bit. So my research program largely centers around studying methionine restriction and also the role of this protein called fibroblast growth factor 21 or FGF21 as potential therapeutics for obesity and its comorbidities. So obesity, as many of you know, especially if you took my obesity class, is associated with lots of comorbidities, including things like type 2 diabetes and cancer and cardiovascular disease, high blood pressure, dyslipidemia, and other things that people may not think of, like mood disorders and reproductive disorders. So there's lots of harmful consequences of obesity. And I guess you can look at it that one of the good things is that we actually know how to cure obesity, and it's burning more calories than you're consuming. So there's this concept of calorie restriction where you restrict the amount of calories you're consuming. We know that works to treat obesity. The problem with calorie restriction is that it's hard to maintain. So while we know it works, it's very difficult for people to maintain a calorie restricted diet long term in order to reduce their body weight. And as you know from the obesity class, if you took that, there's also other things that happen in our body once we gain weight, that when you lose weight, your body has lots of mechanisms in place to try to gain that weight back. So losing weight by a calorie restricted diet is just very difficult to do. In a research setting, calorie restriction of about 40% of ad libitum intake, that means restricting calories by 40% compared to what you would normally eat, that's been shown to not only reduce body weight and adiposity or body fat, but it also extends lifespan. So calorie restriction causes animals to live longer. It also has other benefits like reducing inflammation, increasing insulin sensitivity, which would be good for people with type 2 diabetes. But again, the problem is that it's really difficult to maintain. So given the fact that, calorie restriction induces all these benefits, but it's difficult to maintain, there's been a large focus to try to find calorie restriction mimetics that will induce all these benefits of calorie restriction without the imposition of severe food restriction. And so people began studying restricting individual amino acids in the diet. So there are 9 essential amino acids, meaning that we don't make these in our body, and so we have to consume them in our diet. And we do know that if you completely remove these from the diet, then there's lots of detrimental effects to the body. But it turns out if you restrict this amino acid, methionine, by about 80%, there's a lot of health benefits actually. So this figure is actually from our lab that if you, let me also be clear. These studies were all done in animals and cell culture models and stuff. And what we did was we made these diets that are exactly the same with the exception of one diet has 80% less methionine than another diet. The total protein is the same because we made up for it with another amino acid. So total protein's the same, calories the same, everything is the same with the exception of 80% reduction of methionine. And the diets also don't have cysteine, but it's a non-essential amino acid. So that's not a problem. We can make cysteine in our body. So when you reduce methionine in the diet, these animals weigh less and they live longer. So this was a paper published from another lab showing that when you restrict methionine by 80% in rats, they lived about 40% longer. And so that would be like instead of living to 70 years old, you live to be 98 years old. So it's a very significant extension of lifespan. And the important thing to note is that these animals were also healthier as they age. So there's less incidence of the typical diseases seen in these different strains of rats. So they live longer, they're healthier, they weigh less. And I think for me, one of the most interesting things is that methionine restriction reduces body weight and body fat, despite the fact that these animals are eating more food. So when you restrict methionine in the diet, the animals become hyperphagic. They eat a lot of food. So they're eating a lot of food, but they weigh less, they live longer, they're more insulin sensitive, they have less inflammation, all of these health benefits. And the reason that they're able to eat more and still weigh less and have these health benefits is that the diet causes these animals to burn more calories at rest. So we measured their energy expenditure, how many calories they burn in a day, and these animals are burning more calories. We could also measure their activity. So it's not like they're running around like crazy and burning calories that way. Just at rest, they're burning more calories. And so we wanted to figure out how is that happening? How's methionine restriction increasing energy expenditure? And we looked in the adipose tissue. So again, those have taken my obesity course. You know that there are 2 types of adipose tissue, at least 2 in the body, white and brown. And then there's this intermediate phenotype of adipose tissue. So your white adipose tissue is like what you think of when you think of body fat. It's the fat that's under your skin and around your belly and around your organs. And its major function, although this is an oversimplification, so white adipose tissue has lots of different functions in the body, but its major function is to store extra energy in the form of fat. So if you consume more calories than you're expending, those extra calories will be stored in your adipose tissue as triglycerides. But we also have this other type of adipose tissue called brown adipose tissue, and its major function, in addition to other things, is to actually burn calories. So it releases energy in the form of heat. So white adipose tissue stores calories, whereas brown adipose tissue burns calories. People with more brown adipose tissue are generally leaner and they're more insulin sensitive, whereas people with more white adipose tissue are generally, more on the obese phenotype. So we also know that this white adipose tissue is capable of undergoing browning, where it can take on characteristics of brown adipose tissue, which is important because then you can turn your white fat into this thing that normally stores calories. Now it can turn into something that can burn calories and utilize lots of glucose and fatty acids, which could help maintain your blood lipid levels and your blood glucose levels. And so we knew methionine restrictions increasing energy expenditure, try to figure out how this is happening. And what we did was we took these animals, these mice, we fed them a control diet or methionine restricted diet for 11 weeks. Then we looked in their adipose tissue, and this is the inguinal white adipose tissue. It's a subcutaneous white adipose tissue depot. And we stained the lipid droplet membranes red. So inside your adipocyte, there are these lipid droplets where all the fat is stored. And in a white adipocyte, the lipid droplet, there's one of them, and it's huge, takes up the whole space of the cell. And it actually co-localizes with the cell membrane, which we stain green with this other protein marker. So in the white adipocytes, you can see that the lipid droplet membrane, which is red, and the cell membrane, which is green, they actually overlap and they look yellow because they are on top of each other. Brown adipocytes, on the other hand, they have multilocular lipid droplets, so a bunch of little tiny lipid droplets. And what you can see is when you look in this, again, this is a white adipose tissue depot, you can see these multilocular lipid droplets inside these adipocytes that have a green membrane because the lipid droplets are not overlapping. So just to put it simply, the methionine restricted diet has taken the white adipose tissue and made it look more like brown adipose tissue, which we know burns calories. And we quantified those, what we call beige adipocytes now. These are brown like adipocytes, but that are in a white adipose tissue depot. So we think this is one way that methionine restriction is increasing energy expenditure. We also see it having activity in brown adipose tissue. So it's probably increasing energy expenditure by activating brown adipose tissue and inducing this browning of white adipose tissue. And so we looked further into how this is happening, and we found that like really shortly after switching animals to a methionine restricted diet, like within 6 hours, their levels of this protein called fibroblast growth factor 21 go up. This is in the blood, but it also goes up in the liver and in the white adipose tissue. And this increase in FGF21 is persistent as long as the diet is maintained for months out, we've looked. And so you can read in the literature that FGF21 has these effects in the body, like inducing browning of white adipose tissue and activating brown adipose tissue and increasing energy expenditure. So we wanted to see if the ability of methionine restriction to increase energy expenditure and induce this browning if that's dependent on FGF21. And so we got some mice that don't make FGF21. So there's this technology where you can knock out any gene that you want to study whether it's involved in certain processes. So we have these wild type mice, which are just normal mice that make FGF21. And we have these FGF21 knockout mice that don't make FGF21. And you can see, like we showed with the other picture, when you put the normal mice, the wild type mice, on a methionine restricted diet, you induce this browning of white adipose tissue where you get all these multilocular lipid droplets that look like brown adipocytes. When you do that with the mice that don't make FGF21, that ability of methionine restriction to induce browning is really attenuated. So this tells us that FGF21 is pretty important in the ability of methionine restriction to induce browning of white adipose tissue. And then when we looked at energy expenditure, we saw in the wild type mice, as normal, that methionine restriction increases energy expenditure. That's how many calories they're burning. But it's unable to do that in the FGF21 knockout mice. Again, telling us that FGF21 is necessary for the ability of methionine restriction to increase energy expenditure. So this took us to now ask several other questions about how does methionine restriction increase FGF21? And Hannah did some work in a liver cell line to look at this and try to pinpoint the mechanisms by which methionine restriction is increasing FGF21. We've also been trying to ask where and how does FGF21 exert its effects, which we now know most of the beneficial effects of FGF21 are mediated through its effects in the brain. So I had never been studying the brain until a few years ago, and we've now established some collaborations with people at the Neuroscience Institute and in biology to try to answer these questions. And then another question that's kind of taken us away from the methionine restriction is, now that we know that FGF21 has all these metabolic benefits, we're trying to study its role in cognition. So we know FGF21 has the majority of effects in the brain. So we've teamed up with some researchers in the Neuroscience Institute to see if FGF21 protects the brain from obesity-induced changes in cognition, because one thing that we know is that consuming a high-fat diet or having obesity can cause cognitive decline, like impairments in learning and memory. And we think FGF21, which is elevated in response to high-fat diet feeding and obesity, we think FGF21 is increasing to protect the brain against these high-fat diet and obesity-induced impairments in the brain. And that's Hannah's major, one of her major questions she's asking for her dissertation research. So that was part one. We can save any questions for the end. I only have a few more slides, so it won't be too much longer, but that was a little bit about my journey, my research program, in case you were interested in that. But I always like to talk a little bit about ways that you guys can be, the strongest students while you're in our programs, and also how to make sure you're a good, strong applicant for jobs when you graduate or for grad school if you choose to pursue that route. So I know most of you who are here don't need to hear this, but some people do. So I like to just put this in here. I really wish that there were more like freshmen and sophomores that would come to these meetings so that way they could learn this early on. But there's just some basics that will have you kind of standing out or standing apart from others in your program that you really should do. Like the first basic thing is just to communicate professionally, and always communicate professionally. Just try to maintain that. So it seems like, and I don't know if it's a change because people communicate so casually through social media and things, but there's more and more tendency for students to like not even say Dr. Wanders. It's just a sentence, no greeting, no name at the end. So you want to avoid doing that. So if you notice that a person has a PhD after their name, refer to them as doctor. And if you're unsure, you can always use Miss or Mr. Or if it's one of your instructors, you can always say professor. So professor is good for everyone. So Professor Todd, Professor White, Professor Paulson, Dr. Farrison, Dr. G, Dr. Wanders. And just always start your emails like that, and then finish your emails with whatever salutation you like. I don't know if that's the right word, but I use best, but you could use respectfully, sincerely, thank you, whatever, and then sign your name. And those little things go a long way. Then while you're in your classes, be present. And that doesn't just mean be present in class, like show up. It means be present, be involved, be engaged, because instructors notice that. We notice who is looking at their computer the entire time, and we can tell whether or not you're taking notes on something we're saying, versus those that are engaged and asking questions and answering questions. And it's fine to take notes. We understand students are also taking notes on their computers, but so when you're in class, ask insightful questions or make insightful comments. If an instructor asks a question, try to answer it. Those types of things go a long way. I know I've told this story before to someone, but there was one student in senior seminar who I had never noticed before. And I used to teach more classes. So I used to teach micro. So I would often see these students multiple times in classes. And she didn't necessarily have the strongest GPA or anything like that, but she blew me away in senior seminar because she was so interested in every paper that every student presented, and she would do her own research beyond that. Like a student presented a paper on something that was done in Korea, I think, and it involved like nutrition education, and the student was asking questions. She was like, so I went and I looked, and they actually have these recommendations. So she went outside of the paper that was assigned for the class to do her own reading. And when it came time to write her letter, like I really tried to emphasize the fact that this student really is interested in what we're doing and interested in the science and interested in nutrition. So those types of things, instructors recognize that, believe it or not. So be present and be engaged and be involved. Um, the last one is just a recommendation. So I made this recommendation one time, and then the next, for every day after that, this one student wore a suit and tie to school every day. I'm not saying that you have to like dress super formal every day, but if you are, especially if you're applying to our graduate program, you want your instructors to see you as someone who would be a good representative of the program, because there is a dress code requirement in our graduate program when you're going to these clinical sites. So let us know that you're going to be a good representative of the university and of the department. And that's just a recommendation. I didn't dress super professionally when I was an undergrad, and it still worked out okay. And then what can you do to strengthen your application to grad school or a career? I know some of you are graduating right now, so this may be a little bit late to start on, but you can always do this, to strengthen your application to the next job. Or maybe you don't get into grad school the first time around. What do you do with your time between reapplying? And that's happened before. We had one of the speakers that talked about her experience in senior seminar was someone who applied to the coordinator program, didn't get in, and she used that time to really strengthen her application. So she got more experience in the field. She got a job at CHOA as a nutrition tech, was able to work alongside dietitians who then wrote her letters of rec. She also retook some of her science classes that she didn't do very well in. But you can use all of this during your time while you're a student or after you graduate to strengthen your resume or CV. So one thing that I had been recommending for years is something that you could do is like oversee or manage a project. I had been wanting this database for student opportunities for so many years, and I kept recommending that somebody do this, like create this database with volunteer opportunities and internships and research opportunities and the due dates. And I had no idea that we have this now until I happened to look at one of the emails sent out by the NSN, and I think I know who created it, but I want to talk to them just to be sure. But this is something that you could put on your resume or CV. I created this database. I managed it. I kept it up to date. So that way people can see that you have organizational skills, leadership skills, that this is something that you can do, that you can put on your resume or CV. Get experience in the field. I send out different opportunities when they come across my desk. However, I'm not out seeking these opportunities. This is something you guys have to do. But I know, we have a faculty member who runs Perfectly Portioned Nutrition, Perfectly Portioned Nutrition, and she has an RD collaborator who does Perfectly Portioned Wellness. And several students have gone through and done internships through this program or this company, but there's many, many others out there that I have passed along and students have had opportunities. So look for those opportunities to shadow dietitian, even if it's volunteering. So we've had students like run RD's social media pages and doing outreach for them. And then they get to sit in and shadow on consultations, and all of these things will get you more experience in the field. And then maybe also get you a letter of recommendation from these dietitians. And then volunteer experience. So a one-off here and there is better than nothing, but I know our program likes to see a sustained commitment. So maybe volunteer at an assisted living home and you've been there for a year. And okay. And so then, try to get different volunteer experiences. Here we have the Panthers Pantry where you can rotate through. Other opportunities, Atlanta Community Food Bank, Open Hand. I know Israel sends out lots of opportunities for volunteer experience, and I send some out as well. So that is something good to have on your application or your CV. Leadership roles is something that's important to our coordinated program specifically. So say you work and you had to support yourself through college and you didn't have time to do all these extracurriculars. We understand that too. And showing us that, maybe you've worked at Target and you started out at, a cashier, and then you worked your way up and you've been given these leadership roles. Really highlight that and demonstrate that on your personal statement and CV, and show us, what type of leadership roles you've had. Have you mentored people below you? Have, different. And also within the Nutrition Student Network, I would have to say, I had to do a lot of recruiting to get people to run for officer positions this year. And they're there for you to, take this opportunity to be leaders in the program and in this organization. That looks great on your resume or CV. So if you'll still be around after this next year, because we've just voted in our new officer board, consider running the following year. We have opportunities to serve as an ambassador for the Lewis College. That comes with a $500 professional development fund that you can use for whatever. And that, this is good for someone who's good at networking. So the ambassador will, when we have big wig speakers come, you're the one who like shows them around to their meetings, or you work at the graduation as an usher. And so different things, just kind of representing the Lewis College. You can get involved with research experience. I would say, as an undergrad or grad student, plan to devote at least a year, at least 8 hours per week, because you're not going to get much out of it if you do any less than that. It takes a long time for students to learn the techniques involved with research. But the benefit is that you will learn new things. If you have a good mentor, you'll also be presenting at conferences, maybe getting some abstracts and papers published. So these are all things that look great on your CV, and you'll get to know a faculty member who could serve as a reference for you in the future. And then if you plan to apply to the coordinated program, you can become a student member of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. You can just Google that, become a student member, and then it opens up some different opportunities for you. And there's leadership roles within the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics for students as well. And just to touch on the research, so all of my pictures are from the lab, but because that's the type of research I do. But we also have faculty members who do more community research, who are more clinically focused. So if you're interested in getting research experience, I would recommend that you look at the different faculty members' web pages, find their research and interests, find what they're doing, and reach out individually to one faculty member at a time. Don't blast everyone, and tell them specifically why you're interested in their program, how much time you are willing to dedicate to the lab or to their research, what you want to get out of it, and just see if they're willing to give you a chance and take you on. But it has to be something you're able to commit to, because it takes a lot of time and effort for a faculty member to train a student in research. And if you just leave after, a few months, it's not beneficial to anyone involved. And yeah, this is a picture of one of the undergrad students in nutrition. He's graduated now, but we were in Orlando. He was presenting his research there. So there's the opportunity to travel and present. This is my last slide. So find the balance in two ways. Find the balance, meaning don't overdo things. So you can't say yes to every other opportunity to try to fill up your CV. I mentored one student who did that. She fell behind in all her deadlines for me, and it was extremely frustrating because she was trying to check off everything on that piece of paper, and she had lots of stuff on her CV and resume, but none of it was done 100%. So you don't want to do that. Don't take on too much. Do what is manageable for you, for your mental health as well. The other balance is, I've been telling you about, get to know your faculty members. They can write good letters for you. That is good. So you do want to do that, but you don't want to overdo it. So you don't want, I know I've offered to review personal statements and CVs and resumes. I'm happy to do that. Please send them to me. I'm happy to look at that. But repeatedly going back to a professor and asking to look again. Well, can you check again? Okay, I made this change. Do you want to, can you see it again? And I added this to my CV. Can you look again? That gets to be overwhelming. So your professors also want to see that you can be autonomous, that you can work independently, that you can take direction and go with it. So you don't want to overdo it by, repeatedly asking for help on something that you should be able to handle on your own at a certain point. I'm not trying to discourage you from asking for help, though. That's a part of being a good student. So I'm going to end there so that there's some time if there are any questions. I'll stop sharing so I can see you all again. Where are you? Okay, yeah. So that's all I had for you today. I'm happy to take questions.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
So whenever you started doing research, was that something that you were just like really interested in, or is it something that you've grown to love?
Yeah, I didn't start doing research because I had any specific interest in it at all. Like, I just wanted to stay in Auburn at the time because of the person that I was dating. But once I got into it, that's when it really piqued my interest. And I think that is the case for a lot of people. I know some people, when they give their talks, they're like, I knew from day one that this is what I wanted to do. That wasn't the case for me, but I enjoyed being involved with research. And then, really, when I did my postdoc, was when I really, really fell in love with it. Because in academia, you get to ask your own research questions. Nobody is telling you what to study or what to do. And so we are able to just study what we're interested in. And so that's fun. And then you find students that become interested in it too. And that's another fun part of it. And just as another side note, if you are considering going the PhD route, the other way people go usually after your PhD is academia, which is what I did, or industry, where you can go and work for Coca-Cola or Merck, or some pharmaceutical company, a food and beverage company, and or a biotech company. And there's less flexibility with what you get to research. So they have set things that they're interested in studying, and you have to work within their parameters. And there's also potentially less job security. So, like right now, I have tenure. I feel pretty secure in my job. Before I got tenure, there's very little job security here. But in industry, you get paid a lot more. So there's like the plus and minus of that. So if you're considering that route, I mean, you definitely make more money on the industry side of things. Other questions?
Yeah, Dr. Mondes, I have a quick follow-up. So you did mention that you kind of, you get to choose your own research question and everything like that, but that's when you're already working. So when it comes, let's say, to the graduate school, like coordinated program and for thesis, is it also something that like we can just choose if I'm talking to the existence that I'm already there and everything,
Right.
and I'm already planning on how, I'm
Get
spending,
into it.
like I'm doing a schedule. Yeah. So I guess is it something that is also true for those programs, or it's more that we're doing something that is more like assigned?
Yeah. So when I first came to this department, it was that way. Students just picked whatever they wanted to do. And I ended up, supervising a student who did her thesis on like supermarket dietitian tours. And it took a lot of effort on my part because it's not my area. And so in order to be able to give her good feedback and guidance, it was an extremely, it was a big effort on my part. And that's typically not how it is. Typically, you go into a graduate program, you find a mentor who you want to work with, who you're interested in their work, and you do something in that realm. And that's kind of how it's shifted now. So you can still, there's more options on the master's project side of things. So in the coordinated program, you have different capstone options. One is coursework, so you would take 3 extra classes, and you could do that in geriatric, pediatrics, sports, or public health nutrition. Another capstone option is a comprehensive exam where you have a certain amount of time to answer all these questions from these specific classes. You could do the thesis, which is, I would argue, probably the most time consuming one, where you are involved with research and you have to write it up. And then there's a master's project option. And that one, there's a more flexibility. So you basically find somebody to mentor you in this project, but you're the one who comes up with the idea. And these projects have been extremely diverse. You know, I'm thinking of ones that were done recently were like writing a children's book for like culturally diverse food and nutrition. Another one was like creating um, uh, I don't know how to describe it, but like camp food, like dehydrated food, and you know, making it nutritious and calorically dense, and because that was what that student was interested in. And you know, we had other ones like creating nutrition curriculum for elementary schools, and so those you have more flexibility with, but you have to be the one driving the project. So yeah, but if you're wanting to do research, you should find somebody to work with that's willing to mentor you, that's related to their area with some flexibility. There's a little bit of flexibility.
And when you when you say kind of find the mentor, it's very literally means that I just come up to someone and say, hey, this is me, this is what I do, and I'm interested to working with you.
Exactly. Yeah. And say, are you taking on master's students? I want to do a thesis. And I will say also the coordinated program, generally they start their thesis or their capstone project like in the last year of the program. So it's a 2-year program. But for those of us in the bench sciences, we really recommend you start right away. So if you think that you want to do a thesis, I would not wait until someone comes to you with, all right, let's think about your capstone option now. I would start thinking about that right away.
And those are the people from the department, right? Like those all the mentors. Yeah.
Yes. So actually, yes, you would your primary mentor would be in the department. I was a primary mentor on paper for one coordinated program student, but she was working at Emory on some other project, and so her secondary mentor was at Emory, and the student was so motivated that she was able to, you know, do her thesis research that I wasn't as involved with because it was being done at Emory and it was in a field that was unrelated to me. So if you know that there's another person that's not in our university, you could still do a project with them. You just have to have someone from our department involved. So, you know, I know you worked with PPW. One of our students did her master's project alongside Margot. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting.
Other questions?
So is it just to clarify, let's say I, you know, find someone else and then I come to you most likely, right? And you just be there as a
yeah, so that's
as a signature.
Not just a signature, but to make sure everything, you know, because when you sorry, I have another meeting in 5 minutes, but when you come up with an idea for a project, you know, we would have to approve that beforehand, and then you set off. And so every project has a written component too. So even like the student who created the dehydrated food for the camping, she had to have a lit review on, you know, what are the currently available foods and what are the calorie contents there, and how would these nutrients help with fatigue, and you know, so I would be there to provide guidance and input on that. So you would have at least 2 people mentoring you on a project.
Well, thank you, Dr. Wonders. If there's no more questions, I think that's pretty much it. I really appreciate every time you talk because I think it's so insightful, and I love all of the experience that you share with us every year. I feel like it's new to me every year.
That's good, because it's not. It's pretty much the same thing I said last year, but I'm glad that it seems refreshed. So thank you.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you for the
just a reminder. Yeah, just a reminder, everyone who came in late, we have the NSN Chords application due tonight. So if you want to send that over or ask any questions about that, just feel free to ask. But yes, Dr. Wonders.
Okay, thank you so much. Have a good rest of your semester.
Thank you. You too.
You.
See most of you on Thursday.
Yeah.
Bye.